We are going to be looking at functioning ecosystem today. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to define the terms autotrophy and heterotrophy. Secondly, you should be able to recognize the different feeding relationship that exist among living things. Thirdly, you should be able to construct food chains and food web in different habitats. Now, let's look at the producers. The producers are organisms that are capable of making their own food. They have the ability to manufacture their own food. Independent way by which these organisms manufacture their own food is by trapping the energy from the sun. They trap the solar radiation and it undergo a chemical reaction in which they can be able to convert this energy from the sun into usable energy or in form of food or sugar. This process that of conversion of solar energy into sugar is what we call heterotrophy. Now, apart from conversion of this solar energy into this that occurs by green plants, because the green plants that are the ones that convert solar energy into sugar. They do this through the process we call photosynthesis. We still have other organisms like cyanobacteria that has the ability to synthesize chemicals. They have the ability to convert chemicals and use them to make their own food. They are also autotroph. So either through chemosynthesis or through photosynthesis, these two processes are the two processes that are involved in making of food or in conversion of food independently through the means of photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. Now, let's look at consumers. The consumers are organisms that depend either directly or indirectly on the producers. They depend on food already manufactured by the producers or autotrophs. They are for them to obtain energy for their metabolic activities. They are called heterotrophs. All organisms that are unable to manufacture their own food or organisms that depend on the autotroph, we call them heterotrophs. Now, we have example of such organisms such as you and me, human beings, we are heterotroph. Birds, cats, insects, they are all heterotrophs. Now, let's look at the trophic level. The trophic level is the steps along feeding pathway. The different steps along a feeding pathway. And when you see different categories that are found in a feeding pathway, this is what we call a trophic level. And one thing about it is that with the sense of a trophic level, it can be able to reveal how many levels of energy and nutrient that separate an organism from the producers. How many levels? If you look at this now, we have 5 steps here, which are 5 different trophic levels. We have the first one as the producers, we have the second ones as the primary consumers, we have the third one secondary consumers, we have the fourth one as the tertiary consumers, and we have the last one as the decomposers. Now, these 5 steps that are in this trophic level will show you the gap or the levels that separate the decomposers from the producers. It will show you the level that separate the tertiary consumers from the producers. It will show you the level that separate the secondary consumers from the producers. So the trophic level is the step by step, the steps that are found along a feeding pathway. The steps that are found along a feeding pathway. And in every trophic level, it always starts with a producer. Now, having known this, the concept of trophic level, let's look at types of consumers. Types of consumers. We have primary consumers. These are organisms that feed directly on plants. They feed directly on the producers or the autotrophic organisms. So those they are majorly herbivores, such as elephants, cows, sheep, horses. These are organisms that feed on the photosynthetic plant. They are the ones we call primary consumers. Now, after primary consumer, we have secondary consumers. Okay, before we go into secondary consumers, let's look at different strategies that primary consumers use in manufacturing their own food. Now, we have the first one, we have the herbivores, the ones that feed on photosynthetic algae. We have the frugivores, the ones that feed on fruits of plants. For example, we have the fruit fly. These are some of the primary consumers that feed on fruits of plants. Now we have the nectarivores. The nectarivores, they are the ones that feed on nectar. An example of such plant of such animals, we have the butterflies and nectarivore. Now we have the folivores, the ones that feed on leaves of plants. A caterpillar is a typical example of such animal here. We have the granivores. The granivores are the ones that feed on grains. Weevils, they are examples of granivores. Now let's go to the secondary consumers. The secondary consumers, they don't depend directly on the producers, but they depend directly on the primary consumers. They feed on the primary consumers for them to obtain their own energy. Now they can either be carnivores or omnivores. Example are dogs, animals, and snakes. They are numerous organisms that depend on the primary consumers. Now we have the third one, which are the tertiary consumers that are found at the apex, at the peak of the other consumers. These are organisms that we call them carnivorous predators because they feed on either herbivores or omnivores. They depend on these two for them to survive. They depend on the primary consumers and secondary consumers. Example of such organism, we have lion, or we also have tiger. These are examples of such organisms. And then the decomposers is another level in the trophic level. The decomposers, they are heterotrophic too, because they have the ability to break down organic substances to get energy. They break down dead or decaying substances through the process we call decomposition. In this process, they can be able to obtain their own energy. And the decomposers, we also call them the detritivores. They have the ability to do that. We have example of detritivores or decomposers here. Earthworm, we have the fungi. These are all decomposers or detritivores. Now let's look at a food chain. A food chain is a linear feeding relationship. A linear, when we say that something is linear, which means that it's in a straight line. In a straight line, it's a linear feeding relationship, showing the transfer of energy or nutrient from one organism to the other in a feeding pathway. In a feeding pathway. Remember, feeding pathway in a trophic level. A trophic level. Now, you see here that you see a linear sequence in this particular food chain here. A linear sequence in which nutrient is being transferred. Right now, firstly from the producer, which is the grass. From the grass to the grasshopper. Grasshopper will eat up the grass to get its own energy. The grasshopper will be eaten by the mouse, which will be the secondary consumer, and the mouse will be eaten by the owl, which is a tertiary consumer. Now, generally, you see that the food chain always starts with a producer, and then you see consumers, and if possible, you see decomposers. So, if you look at a linear food chain, remember that a food chain is linear in nature. Note that always. Now, look at, we have two types of food chain. We have grazing food chain and we have decomposer food chain. But let's look at the grazing food chain first. The grazing food chain starts with a producer, which is a green plant, a photosynthetic plant. Here you see plants and other photosynthetic organisms at its base, then followed by herbivores, carnivores, and the tertiary consumers. You look at this one now, you see this a plant, which is the producer. You see primary consumer, this a herbivore, caterpillar, because it feeds on the plant. and you see a bird that will come and eat up the caterpillar as a secondary consumer. Then you see a bigger bird, an eagle probably, that will come and eat a tertiary and eat the secondary consumer, which is this one is the tertiary consumer. Now, a detrital food chain. A detrital food chain start with an organic matter as the producer. Now, this organic matter will be consumed by primary detritus feeder. This detritus feeder will be eaten by a secondary detritus feeder. So here you should understand that the producer here is no longer a grain plant. Neither is it a bacteria, neither is it a chemosynthetic organism. No, but the producer here is an organic matter. The organic matter that is being under decay or will be made used by this detritus feeder. Then from there it can be consumed by other organisms. Now, food chain in an aquatic habitat. In an aquatic habitat, we have a food chain. The consumer that we can see there is an algae, a green algae that we call phytoplanktons. This algae that lives at the depth of the sea, they are the ones that we call the producers here. In an aquatic habitat, you see that the green algae is being consumed by mollusks. It can be sea crabs, mollusks that are found in depth of the sea. They will eat this up, and the mollusks will be eaten by the slimy scorpion. The slimy scorpion will be eaten by the Chinook salmon. So you see that here we have the primary producer, which is the general producer here as the green algae, while the primary consumer is the mollusks, and secondary consumer slimy scorpion, and tertiary consumer is the Chinook salmon. Now, let's look at a food web. A food web is a complex feeding relationship that comprises more than one food chain. In a food web, you have many food chains that comes together to form one. That's why we call it food web. Food web, because you see interconnections between one food chain and the other. So here you have to take into consideration of different patterns of feeding in different organisms that makes it to be complex. That one organism has the ability to eat more than one type of food. Look at this picture of a food chain. We have the producer here as the plant, as the grain plant. This producer will be eaten by different organisms. Yeah, a rat can eat this up. A herbivore, it can eat this. A rabbit can also eat the same plant. A goat can also eat the same plant. So you see here that it is becoming more complex. Now, you see that this rat that is the herbivore can be eaten by different carnivores. White cat can eat the rat. White owl can eat the rat. A snake can also eat the rat. So even the snake here, it can be eaten by a hawk. So the owl can be eaten by a hawk. The white cow can be eaten by a lion. So you see the interrelationship between one food chain and the other. How you will be able to see that a goat is a herbivore. A herbivore, the primary consumer here now. That this goat can also be eaten by a fox. A fox can be eaten by a lion. So you see that here we have a very complex relationship between living organisms based on how they feed. So this complex relationship that brings about different interrelated food chain is what we call food web. Now, food web, this is a typical example of a food web in a terrestrial habitat. You can have different food web in aquatic habitat, food web in a forest. So these are different food web that we have. It's a complex feeding relationship. Now, make sure that you will be able to identify the highlighted words, vocabularies, because we are going to make use of them in our forum. Make sure that you won't miss it out because your points are very, very necessary. I just want to make the brief introduction. Thank you and see you next time.